say from Minneapolis?
Marshall, Southwest Minnesota.
Southwest, okay. Yeah, somewhere a long ways from here. Or
4.5 hours, yeah.
Yeah, you drove quite a ways to get here. So we're glad that you're here. Thanks for making the trip.
You're welcome.
Yeah, so if you haven't had some pizza, grab some pizza. And that's provided by Diversified Solutions. Yeah, so we'll have them say a few words here in a bit. Paige is going to tell us all about them. Before we do that, we like to start our meetings with announcements, things that are going on in the community, stuff that you guys think is interesting, that other people in the group might like to hear about. Any conferences, things like podcasts, books you've read, anything like that other people might find useful. Is Connect Omaha up this year? I don't think it is. I haven't heard anything about it, so probably not. Any other conferences you guys know about? Nothing's right around the corner that I'm aware of.
Not locally. I'm going to one in Vegas in March.
Okay. There's lots of conferences in Vegas.
Yeah.
I was having trouble hearing you back here, Matt.
Oh, yeah. Just any announcements that you might have that that people in the group might find interesting. If you're doing something cool at work, whatever. Okay. Well, if there's no announcements, I'll turn it over to Paige, who's going to tell us a bit about Diversified Solutions and all the awesome stuff they're doing. So here you go.
Hi, I probably recognize some of you because I've seen you on LinkedIn. So I'm with Diversified Solutions. I'm Paige Edwards, and I'm with my colleague Clay Reimers, and we sponsored tonight, but thank you for letting us join you as well. I think the .NET area is wonderful. There's a lot of opportunity here for developers, whether you are just starting out or whether you've been doing it for decades, or whether you're using traditional technology or whether you're growing in your technologies. There's ample opportunity in the marketplace, but you guys probably know that. At Diversified Solutions, one of the things I just want to tell you, just as the world has changed for you guys when it comes to remote working, you can kind of do your own thing now. It's changed for us too. We can recruit all over the United States. But one of the things that Diversified is very committed to is the local community. We feel like it's really important to sponsor events like this, to reach out to the local talent first when we have an opportunity, especially the good ones, right? Because community, relationship, all that stuff is still very important, and it almost feels like it's kind of missing in some of the recruiting or some of the job hunting or job searching anymore. So everybody's home alone a lot, everybody's doing their own thing, they're on team meetings all the time, but events like this are very important. So if you guys ever need anything, if you ever even just want to talk about the opportunities that are out there, we have local businesses we're recruiting for. We have businesses all over the United States that we are actually recruiting for now. So there's just a lot happening. So if you or anybody that you know would ever like to have a conversation, just let us know. Thank you.
Thanks, Paige.
Yeah.
So I'm going to turn it over to Robert, who's going to tell us all about Fiddler and the cool stuff you can do with that. I'm excited to hear about this because I'm sure I've used Fiddler for a long time, but I'm sure there's tons
Hopefully
I don't
there'll be
know about
something
it.
new.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there is.
That's what
So
I'm
I'm excited
shooting
to hear about it. Yeah, thanks.
All right, so we're going to talk about advanced Fiddler techniques. And I don't mind if you have questions, just raise your hand. We'll take them as we go. So a little bit about myself. I am a Progress Ninja, so they sent me some t-shirts. So that's like a Microsoft MVP for Fiddler. I put up my Twitter, my email, and my blog information. So if you want to reach out to me after, I'll show that again at the end. I do have the slides and the code are all going to be available. I'll have a link with that at the end as well. So we'll start first with, we're going to talk about HTTP, the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So that's what we're going to be looking at when we're using Fiddler. There's actually 3 versions now that are still somewhat active. HTTP 1.1. HTTP 2 came out in about 2015, and now there's HTTP 3, which they're working on standardizing at this point. So the only thing I want to talk about as far as HTTP is the specs are actually pretty readable. So if you do ever have questions about you doing a trace and you don't know how are things supposed to work, the specs are actually a pretty good place to see what the browser vendors are supposed to be doing, right? Not necessarily what they are doing, but the other thing I'll mention with HTTP is HTTP 2 is not supported by Fiddler Classic. So I'm going to talk about Fiddler Classic and Fiddler Everywhere. It was just added to Fiddler Everywhere, but be aware if you're looking to test specifically HTTP2, if you have Fiddler running, it'll actually downgrade the connection to HTTP 1.1. And if you've seen HTTP before, it's a request and a response paradigm that's made up of both headers and bodies. So we'll see that throughout the talk. So how many people have used Fiddler, just so I have an idea? Quite a few? Okay. So what is it? It's a tracing tool that was built specifically for HTTP and HTTPS. So Eric Lawrence, I gave you his Twitter information here. He actually was working, I think, at Microsoft on the clip art team. So they would sell clip art. This was early 2000s. And a customer would say, I paid for something and I can't download it. So they would call in for help. And Eric noticed that all of his support people had no good tools to do any troubleshooting. So I've been doing web a really long time. And so I remember Network Monitor, which is similar to Wireshark if you use Wireshark today. But Eric didn't know C#, he didn't know .NET, he didn't know HTTP, and for some reason he decided then to go out and read about all that stuff and write Fiddler, which I think is pretty amazing. So he worked on that on his own from about 2003 till 2012. He actually sold Fiddler to Telerik, which is now owned by Progress. And so he worked for them for a couple of years. Now he's back at Microsoft. So now Progress and Telerik run Fiddler. And like I said, there's two different versions. There's Fiddler, the one you've probably used or you've been familiar with, they now call Fiddler Classic. So that only runs on Windows. I'm going to use that primarily for my talk tonight because the advanced techniques I'm going to show you are not all available in the Fiddler Everywhere yet. Fiddler Everywhere's advantage is it's cross-platform. So they rewrote it .NET Core, and it runs on Mac, Linux, and Windows. So if you want a cross-platform solution, that's what you want to look for. They've also done a lot of user interface changes. I'm going to show it at the very end, but there are some specific things I want to show you that are only in Fiddler Classic, so I'm going to start with that. Most of the things will be available, but I'll mention the things that aren't available in Fiddler Everywhere. So how does Fiddler work? So it's important to understand that Fiddler is a proxy. So what that means is it's going to sit between the browser and the server. And if you're ever doing traces, if you want to look at HTTP or HTTPS, your browser or your client solution has to know how to use a proxy. So I'm going to show you how that works by default. Modern browsers all pick this up automatically. So if I just go into the settings, and we'll go to System and Performance. So you've got your computer proxy settings right here, which are coming from Windows. And you can see I'm not running Fiddler right now, so I'm just connected to Wi-Fi, and I've got the user proxy servers off. So if I go and, let's get out of this, I'm now going to open up Fiddler Classic. So as soon as it starts, it's going to tell Windows that it's a proxy for HTTP and HTTPS running on port 8888, okay? And then modern browsers will automatically pick that up, and they'll start routing all their traffic through Fiddler. So now that I've started this up, if I go back and look at the browser again, we go back and open our proxy settings. You can see it's got use a proxy server on, and if I edit this, you'll see that it's got HTTP. So if you've ever seen the t-shirt, there's no place like 127.0.0.1. So there's no place like home. That's the IP address that points to your own laptop. So it's basically told Windows if you have HTTP or HTTPS and you want to be traced, if you want to go through a proxy server, that's where it should go. And what's running there on 8888 is the local version of Fiddler here. So as soon as I do that, I'll go back and open up Fiddler again. And if I go back and request a page, so I've just got a fictional travel page here that we'll look at. And we'll see the requests going down the left. So I'm going to drill into all of this stuff, but now that I've started it up, like I said, all the modern browsers just automatically know to use the window proxy settings, and so it automatically starts sending it through Fiddler. I'll talk a little later. If you have a client that you're trying to troubleshoot and you don't see the traffic, make sure that you set the proxy settings for it. And I'll show you a couple places. Luckily, like I said, if you're using a browser, it'll just pick it up for you. I don't love this term. Eric chose the term web session to be a single request and a response. So I'm an ASP.NET developer, been doing it for a long time. So a session to me is a series of requests and responses. But if you look at his book or the documentation, it's all going to talk about a web session. They're really only referring to a single request and a response. There's a lot of things I can do with web sessions, so I'm just going to show you a couple of them here. I'll open up Fiddler again. And I'm going to go in the browser. I'm just going to hit Control F5 to make sure that stuff gets traced. Try that again. So now I can see these sessions. So here is the request for the HTML page. And if you've seen this before, this is what gets sent to the server. It just says I want to do a get. Here's the URL I want. Here are a bunch of other headers that we'll talk about. And then here's the body that comes back. And we'll see if I pop this into Notepad. This will look like HTML like you expect. So I can trace and see everything that goes back and forth between the browser and the server. So I work with a lot of third-party vendors. I have to work with security people. I have to work with ops people. So I will often send these traces to somebody else. So I may want to come in here and say things like, I'll right-click on this jQuery. I might come in here and say, I'm going to mark that as gold. So that's what I want them to pay attention to. And then I can put a comment on something like, please upgrade, for instance. That way when I send it to somebody else, they know which sessions they should focus on and look at things.
You can save them?
Oh, yep.
You can save those traces in your
Yeah, so the question was, can you save these traces? So I'll show you how to do that quick. So I can just do a file, save all sessions, and then I can save it into an individual file. I wish they would make this the default, but you can actually do password protected as well. So it'll use AES, I think 128-bit by default, but you can set it to 256-bit. So that's a good point. If you are sending this to a third party or somebody outside of your company, you're going to want to do that encryption on the archive file, because if you send it an email, people might get sensitive stuff, right? This might have user ID, passwords, credit cards. So if I were to save that, password protected, I just type in a passphrase, send it to them an email. Obviously, don't send the password at the same time, right? Some other way to communicate what the password is. But yeah, you can save that off and then refer to it later.
And they should have, the third party, they should have the Fiddler to open.
Yeah, so when I first started doing Fiddler, it was relatively new. And a lot of times when I worked with another vendor, they had not used it before. But these days, it's pretty common that people know, I'll send it to a lot of my third-party vendors, and they say, yeah, we know how to read a Fiddler trace, and a lot of security people use it as well. So a couple other things here. So I'll put in that mark, I'll put in the comments. There are times where I want to do a search. So if we look, so I work on an e-commerce site, and I've got lots of JavaScript, CSS. We get things from a lot of developers. We get stuff from third parties. So there's times where I'll look at a trace like this, and I'll say, I don't know why there's this request here, right? It's a halflings. It's a font. I don't know who requested this thing. What you can do then is come in and say, I want to do a search. So I'll do a find sessions. I'll just type in halflings. Hit enter. You notice it marked the font, but it didn't do what I really wanted it to do. I really wanted it to tell me, why did this get requested? Did I have it in my HTML? Did somebody pull it in a JavaScript file? Why is this thing there? So the other thing to be aware of when you do a find, I wish they made this the default. I use compression. So I worry about performance for our site. So we compress all of our JavaScript, all of our CSS. And by default, it does not look into those compressed files. So when I do a search, it searched for the URLs, but it didn't look into those files to see because they were compressed. If I say decode compressed content, it will actually trip and point back to Bootstrap. So it's because I had bootstrap min.css, somewhere in there is why I have the font file. So if you're ever doing troubleshooting like that, that search is useful. He added a feature that you can actually come to select, and I can say, please find the parent request for this request. So it's going to trace back. It knows that it pulled this in because of that CSS. So if I do that again, it'll take a second here, and then it points to Bootstrap again. So it just helps me identify. Like I said, normal web pages have about 100 requests, and we get a lot of third-party stuff. It's not always obvious where things come from. So that's why it's helpful to be able to do a search. Another cool thing in here, if I want to match other sessions. So if I look at any of these sessions, let's say I want to find all of the other JPEGs that are in here, I can hold the Alt key, and I click on the value of that column. So I'm just going to click on one of these JPEGs, and it selects all of the other JPEGs in the trace. So whatever value you want to do that by, if I want to see everybody that got a 200 response, I just hold the Alt key, and it'll find all the other sessions in this trace that have that same value. Okay?
That's by column.
Yep, by column. So I'm just going to choose whichever column I'm going to go by, hold the Alt key down, and it'll find everybody else who has that same value. Next thing is decrypting HTTPS. So I hope you all use HTTPS for your sites. If you don't, have people heard of Troy Hunt? Have it been pwned? Okay, so he's a famous security guy, and he runs Have I Been Pwned. You can go out there and put in your email address and see if it's been in any data breaches, okay? And he had somebody, I don't know who the poor guy was, that he said, you need to use HTTPS for your sites. And the guy said, I don't, my site's just static, it doesn't make any difference. And he goes, are you giving me permission to use your site as a demo? And the guy said, sure, you can't do anything to my site. And he just makes a mockery of this poor guy's site with unicorns and Harlem Shake and all this other stuff. So you should be using HTTPS, and we've used it for quite a few years, but the problem is when you have HTTPS, now you want to do troubleshooting, and you couldn't see anything anymore. So Eric added in the ability to decrypt HTTPS. So when people first hear that, that should be kind of concerning, right? The whole point is you're doing encryption so people on the wire can't see what your data is. So why is it that Fiddler can, and why is that okay? So what Fiddler does, HTTPS is really just HTTP running on either SSL, which is old, or TLS. So you should be running on TLS today. Fiddler acts as a person in the middle. Because it's a proxy server, what Fiddler does is kind of a neat trick. Fiddler says, I'll get into a little bit of the HTTPS. When your browser contacts the server has a certificate. It's going to give that to the client. What Fiddler does is it says, I want you to trust me to be a certificate authority. So when you type in www.bing.com, it's going to go to Fiddler. Fiddler will make up a certificate that looks like it's Bing. So it'll create a certificate on the fly. Because you trust Fiddler, and I'll show you the steps to do the trust, it will make up certificates that look like the actual server. That way you're talking to Fiddler. Fiddler has the private key, so it can decrypt it. Then it goes to the real server, gets the real certificate, and it encrypts it again. But that's why Fiddler can sit in the middle and do that decryption. So I'll just show you quickly. I've already done it on my machine, but I'm going to clear this out. I'll go first to, we'll just pick on Bing, and I'm not responsible for, no, I'll do my own. I hate showing another site, I don't know what it'll show. So by default, if I go into Fiddler, I would get what you'd expect. I can't see any of the traffic because it's using HTTPS. So what I want to do is come under Tools, Options, HTTPS. So if you've never done this before on this machine, when you click on this Decrypt HTTPS, it'll say, do you want to trust Fiddler to be a certificate authority? You say yes. It'll ask you like 10 times. Are you sure you want it? And you say, yes, I want to trust it. I've already done all of that. So I'm just going to click Decrypt HTTPS. I'm going to go back. Sometimes it doesn't pick it up on the fly, so we'll see if it catches it or not. And it didn't, so I'm going to restart my browser quick. So I'm going back to that site, hit Control F5, and now I can see all of that traffic. And if you look at any of it and open it up on the right-hand side, I'm going to take compression off. And it looks like what you'd expect. So it was able to do that decryption. And if I go back into here, there's actually a way to get into the certificate manager. So let's just open up this. So what it did when I said I want to trust it, your browser trusts major certificate authorities, right? Like the DigiCert, all those other. You'll notice these three right here. When I said I would trust Fiddler, it put it into my trusted root certificates. So now I trust every certificate that Fiddler makes. So it's just making one up on a fly. So if I go look at my personal now, and I look at certificates, you can see all of these. Like Bing, I didn't actually get Bing's certificate. I got the one that Fiddler signed for me. But that's the only way it can decrypt. Does that make sense? So it's kind of a slick way to do it. The important part is you should be using HTTPS, and you're still going to be able to troubleshoot as long as you enable it like that. And I'll talk a little bit later about how you can do that with phones and such. But that is decrypting. Next thing is filters. So filters give me a quick way to do some of the things I want to do in Fiddler. So I'm going to go make a request again. I'll go back to the local one here and hit Control F5. So I can come into, move this. If I go into the filters, there's quite a few things I can do here to change how Fiddler's going to behave. So if I want to, I can show only certain hosts. So I don't know if you've opened up Fiddler before, and you see that your machine talks to a lot of people all the time, even when you're not doing stuff, right? There's a lot of background chatter going on. Sometimes it's hard to wait through all that stuff to figure out what you want to see. So you can actually come in here and say, I only want to see traffic to bing.com or whatever your URL is. That way you don't see all of that other background noise going on. Some of the other ways I can limit it to a specific process. So I can pull down, here's the list of processes that are running on my machine. If I want to hone in on a specific instance of Edge or Chrome or a specific app, I can do that as well. The other cool thing is it's not just passive monitoring. Fiddler's actually lets you make modifications because it sits between your browser and your server. It can change things on the fly. So by default, you saw here I was using Bootstrap. If I go to the inspectors, it has this little gold bar here. It says it's using compression, which it should. It said I used gzip, and it got down to about 28K. So what I can do in the filters is I can make a modification. The way compression works, your browser sends a request header saying, I accept encoding of gzip and Brotli and whatever else. Then the server knows the browser can handle compression, okay? So what I can do is I can say, before it goes to the server, please delete that accept encoding header. I want to see what happens if it looks like a browser doesn't do compression. So if I take that and I put that on, and I hit Control F5 again, and I'm going to go back, and you'll see that Bootstrap now is 122K instead of 27K. So it's just a quick way if I want to knock out certain request headers or make modifications, I can do that here in filters. A couple other things, you can hide 304s and other things. There is a time heat map, so if I turn on the heat map and I do Control F5 again, it'll mark the sessions that were fast with green, the ones that were kind of slow with yellow, and if they're over 500 milliseconds, it'll mark them as red. So I can quickly just, and my server here is local, so you won't see anything. But if I do Control F5, it'll show me the specific requests that are too slow, so I know which ones to hone in on, which is helpful. You can do blocking. So if you want to see what would happen if your CSS files got blocked, it's going to look pretty horrible, right? Why would you want to do that? There's a technique called inlining CSS or critical CSS, if you do a lot of performance work, where they tell you to put the basic stuff of your CSS in line with your HTML. If I would have done that, this would have at least had the gray background and some of the other stuff. It wouldn't be perfect, but it would look a lot better than that, right? So it's just a way for me to do testing where I can block that kind of stuff. If you have to do, we're not subject to GDPR in the United States, but if you do the California Privacy Act and you're concerned about vendors that are setting cookies, you can actually come and say, please flag any responses that set cookies. Then if I do a Control F5 again, it'll pinpoint for me all the third-party scripts that are setting cookies on my client's machine. So I know that those are the vendors I have to worry about for privacy concerns, if that makes sense. So that's kind of handy. So that's filters, just a quick way to do a few things you might want to do. He did have to add this troubleshooting filters. People, the number one call or support thing he'd get about Fiddler, people would turn on filters and forgot they turned them on. And then they'd come back later and they're like, I don't see any of my stuff. Why? So he actually, if you go into help and turn on troubleshoot filters, it'll show anything the filters are blocking, but it'll strike through so that you can see it's not there because you turned on filters. So now we'll get to the cool stuff. So Fiddler actually got its name because of this composer feature. So again, because Fiddler's sitting between the client and the server, I can actually make modifications on the fly. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And I'm going to show you things that you're only going to use for good, not evil. Okay? So I'll just show you a few of these. I'm going to clear this out. So I'm going to make a request again. I'll hit Control F5. Now what I can do here is I can open up Composer. So Composer lets you literally type a request. So if I were bored enough, I could go hand type a request. And why that's interesting, you can't always make browsers do things that you want to see your server behave. It's just not easy to do it. I'm not that bored, so I'm going to drag this one over. So by default, that was my Bootstrap request. And just to show you again, I can literally modify anything in the request header. This is, I'm going to take out that accept encoding line again. We'll keep going with that theme for now. And if I hit execute, you'll see it's back to 122K. So again, Fiddler sat in between, and it took that off. It let me change that via Composer. So I've used Composer a lot, specifically for security things, where we get a pen test or something, and somebody says this page has this issue. I can't always make a browser do what they want me to do, but I can make Composer do anything I want to make Composer do, if that makes sense. A better example, and this is where you're not going to use this for evil. So I've got a web page where you can buy some stuff. This is actually a sandbox site that Eric set up a long time ago based on the hardware you can see. But you can hack against this without getting into trouble, so that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to buy this. It's $1,095. I'll do a checkout. It says, hey, you got one. It costs you $1,095. What I can do now is I can drag stuff over to Composer. So I'm going to drag this over and just see what actually happens when you do this post. So I'm going to drag it over here. And if you do security work, you'll say, well, it's a post, and it's got all these headers. But this is interesting. It has the cost. It's actually posting the price from the client to the server. Now, I know our developers aren't this stupid that they're going to actually use that price, are they? Right? So I'll hit execute, see what happens. If I come back now and I go back to inspectors, I take this off, pop it up in Notepad, and we'll see that I got an order, and I'll be billed $1 each. So again, it's not something that you can test easily. Like if you're doing your stuff right, you're supposed to be validating on the server. It's only on the client to make it look pretty for users, right? You never trust what the client is doing. They are actually posting the price. That would be hard for me to test if I didn't have something like Composer where I can literally change that entire request. So Composer's pretty cool. Like I said, I do a lot of security work, and security people really like curl. So if you've used curl before, it is just a command line tool to let you make web requests. And so I looked all over. I kept getting people saying, run this curl against your page and you'll see you have this SQL injection problem or whatever. Every time I went to look for a safe Windows curl program, I never found something that I would actually install on my machine. So I thought it was helpful when I came in here. This Scratchpad is actually a full curl interpreter. So if I go here, I'm just doing curl www.bing.com. If I execute that, we'll look at the request. The request is coming from curl and Fiddler. That's just the user agent. And then you can see down here, that's the Bing homepage. So again, if you use curl a lot, just be aware it's built in here under Composer, under the Scratchpad. Okay, next one, breakpoints. So I'm going to clear this. I want the capability of actually making changes on the fly from the browser to the server or the other way. So there's a little, it's called quick exec down here in the corner. I'm going to type BPU, which means breakpoint on the way up, basically. I want a breakpoint when you see bootstrap min.css coming from the client, I want you to pause so I can play with that request. So I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to go back and hit my page and hit Control F5. And if we go back into Fiddler, you'll see there's a little dash right here. It's actually sitting here waiting. So the client has made a request for Bootstrap, but Fiddler said, I'll stop it here so you can make changes if you want to. So again, I'll just, as an example, I'll take that accept encoding off. I'll hit run to completion, and we'll see it finish. And if everything comes back all right, it's 122K. So we know it's not using compression again. So if you want to be able to tweak stuff between the client to the server, so I'm going to take that off. I just have to type BPU. So that was on the way from the browser to the server. I want to make a change now when it comes back from the server. So I'm going to type BP after, and I'm going to type site.css. That's another one of my CSS files. I'll just clear this. Do Control F5. So now you can see it's sitting right here. It went to the server. The server gave me site.css, but I want to change it. So I'm going to come here, take off the compression, and I'm just going to look for the color here. So I'm going to change the body color to red and hit run to completion. And then if I go back in the browser now, you can see it's made that change. So why would you want to do that? We have a lot of people that want to test out CSS or JavaScript changes against our production site that we don't want to try to build and shove out to production. You can basically make any modification you want. So you point at prod, get your CSS file, make the changes you want to do in your CSS, and then see how it's going to actually look when it runs in the browser. So that's kind of handy. So I'm going to turn that back off. I'm just going to type BP after. So that is a pretty powerful way to get in between. I actually had to use that, so I'll diverge for just a second. Performance, we bundled all of our CSS files together. If you know, bundling just had made less requests. And so it performed better, and it worked fine, and it worked for the first month. The next month, somebody changed the CSS, and it didn't work in IE. Every other browser was fine. IE didn't work anymore. It just randomly threw out some of the styles. So I literally used the breakpoints and started doing a binary search where I just started deleting half the file to see what was wrong. It turns out IE, and I don't know if it's still true with Edge, you can only have 4,096 unique styles per style sheet. We crossed that limit, and it was just not honoring style. So as I was clipping stuff out, I would notice that it would work again. So I eventually, yeah, that was a fun day. So that is breakpoints. That's some of the reasons you'd want to use it. The next cool thing with Fiddler is the auto responder. So what I can do with this is I can set up rules, again, between the client and the server to make things behave differently. So I'm just going to clear that. Now you'll notice when I do Control F5, the text is back, right? I only changed it on that one request when the response came back. So I'm going to go back into Fiddler. I'm going to go to auto responder, and I'm going to drag Bootstrap over here. And there's a lot of things I can do. I can make it intentionally fail. So I can say, what if Bootstrap came back with a 404? What would my client do? In this case, I'm going to do something I do for a lot of performance testing. I'm going to set up an intentional delay. So I'm setting up 15,000 milliseconds, so 15 seconds worth of delay. And I'm going to see what happens when Bootstrap CSS. You'll see it starts to spin. And this is what your users see while they're waiting for your CSS file. So again, this might be a reason why if you did this on your own site, you might decide to inline some of your CSS just so you could at least get the gray background with a black border, at least makes it look like something's running on your site, if that makes sense. So there are a lot of things you can do with rules. That's one of the common ones that I do. I've heard people, another thing you can do, if you had a really important demo and you needed to show it to clients or executives, people will actually save off their whole Fiddler session. We were talking about saving sessions and files before. And then you can set up rules. If your demo's not going well on the live site, you can just open up Fiddler and have rules already set up and tell it to serve off of your hard disk with finished stuff that you know works rather than going to the real server. So you can literally, so I've heard people do that. We work with a lot of designers that want to play with CSS on our production site, and they'll give it to me, and I'm not going to move your half-made changes to production to see what happens. So we taught them how to use Fiddler. So they'll set up a rule. So I can drag this, let's do the site CSS. I can drag it over here and say I want to actually serve that from a file. So I can save off that CSS locally, and then as long as I have Fiddler and that rule up, every time I'm going to the site, it'll actually pull that CSS off my disk instead of getting it from the actual server. So our designers are a lot happier because they'll tweak stuff and test it with Fiddler against prod or stage or wherever they want to point without having to give it to me and wait for me to do a move and a build and everything else. So that is some of the rules. So I talked before about doing tracing. So I can run Fiddler on Windows. Now I can run it on a Mac or Linux. We are a responsive website, which just means that we run on all breakpoints. We run on phones, tablets, desktops. The site adjusts itself down to the width of the device. So we actually get more traffic from mobile devices now than we get from desktops. So the problem was we started to make our site. Somebody said, this doesn't look good on my iOS device. What's going wrong? And I had no tool to troubleshoot it. So what I can do with Fiddler, I can actually run it on my machine. So if I go, I'm going to open up Fiddler here again. If I go under Tools Options and go to Connections, I can say, please allow remote computers to connect to Fiddler on my machine. Okay? So what I'll do is I'll turn that on. I'm still running on port 8888. But now I've opened it up that anybody on the same network as me, they can route their traffic through my machine. And then I can do everything that I'm teaching you here, all the troubleshooting, decrypting, all of that stuff. So I'll show you what you have to do on an iPhone if I can get my... So it's in a weird place. I have an iPhone. You don't actually set your proxy settings on the Wi-Fi network. You don't set it in your browser. You set it on your Wi-Fi network. So if you go into your iPhone, you can actually set the proxy. So what I did is, on my laptop, I go to a command, type ipconfig, and I found out that the config for this box is this, 192.168.1.8. So then I went to my phone and said, please proxy all of your traffic to that IP address and that port, and then I can see everything through here, even though they're using it over on their phone. Does that make sense? The only thing that gets slightly tricky is if you're using HTTPS, which you should be, you've got to get that phone to trust your Fiddler root certificate. So if you go out to Telerik has videos and blogs on how to do that, but you need to export the certificate off of your machine. They have to know how to install it properly on iOS or Android. It's not that hard. And then you'll be able to do all the decryption and stuff that you want to be able to do. Okay? So that is tracing. The other time I do this, I'm sure this doesn't happen to you, but I have a marketing person. I actually had a senior VP that didn't get something to work right. I don't normally want to install anything on anybody else's machine, because as soon as I do that, about 6 months later, their printer's going to break, and it's going to be my fault because I put Fiddler on it, right? So generally now, if I troubleshoot for someone else, I go change their proxy settings, just like it was an iPhone or an Android. I route their traffic through my Fiddler rather than install Fiddler on their machine, because then I can do everything I need to do, and I don't have to teach them the decryption, all the other stuff. It's just a lot easier. I'll show you another thing we can do later, but this is a pretty common thing I'll do for tracing. A couple warnings here, things that I do all the time, so I know it will probably happen to you. You can actually limit, so if you watch up in the top here, if I I clicked on this any process, so right now it's watching any process that proxies through Fiddler, it will trace. If I only want to get it from a certain browser, I can actually drag this and drop it on that instance, and now you see it says MS Edge, so it's only going to trace traffic from that specific browser instance. This is the other thing Eric got all the calls about, because people would do that. They'd go close their browser, and then they'd say Fiddler's broken and it doesn't trace anything anymore. It's because you're pointing it at a process that died, so it's not going to trace anything. So if you do that, just make sure you click on there and take it off. The one that catches me more often, as soon as I have a good trace, I come down here and turn off capturing, because I don't want to get other stuff. I already got the stuff I want. I don't need a whole bunch of other traffic in here. But I'll forget that I did that, and I'll go back and start hitting pages and wonder why I'm not getting a trace anymore. So if you do those two things, just look at that. You can also limit here. So I'll do this a lot. you can say, I only want to see traffic from web browsers. We'll cut out a lot of the background system updating stuff that's going on. But again, if you switch that, just make sure you turn it back if you need it. I'm an ASP.NET developer. I run IIS on my development machine. And so ASP.NET's actually running on my box. So if I open up Fiddler, I can trace traffic between the browser and my ASP.NET page, and it works fine, right? My ASP.NET pages usually make off-box calls to other HTTP web services or web APIs or whatever. Doesn't trace that by default. So what's wrong is, and it boils down to, the browser knows that it was proxied through Fiddler, but your code in .NET does not. So you need to basically set your code to be proxied. That's why it's important to remember Fiddler's not like Wireshark. It's not watching all of your network traffic. You need to proxy traffic through it or you're not going to see it. So if you go into .NET, you can actually set this in your web config file, app config, whatever your client is. You can either manually set the proxy in code, or if you drop this piece of code into your web config and such, all of the .NET classes that make HTTP calls will now be traced. So if you're ever trying to get that other level of calls, that might be something you need to set. Does that make sense? Or basically anytime you have a client that you know is talking HTTP or HTTPS and is not being traced, make sure that it's using a proxy. And this just happens to be how you do it in .NET. So we've seen how to make modifications. He actually built a full system for scripting into Fiddler. So now I can programmatically make changes to stuff on the fly. And it's kind of funny because he was at Microsoft at the time, so it's kind of a JavaScript-y language, but they couldn't just say JavaScript, and you know how this stuff goes. So it had to be JScript.net, but it's basically JavaScript. So if you go under Rules, Customize Rules, I'm just going to search for, so there's a number of events that are going to occur, and this is the, I think, on before request. So this script will get kicked every time there's a client request to a server for any resource. It's going to kick this function. And there's lots of things I can do in here. It's got IntelliSense and other stuff. I'm just going to do this. If that session is for a .jpeg file, I want to make it look yellow. Just who knows why. Work with me. And if I go do that and I hit Control F5 and I go back, now you can see those requests are all in yellow. So I can modify the content. So if I want to write script to take off headers or add cookies or whatever I want to do, just know that you have a scriptable capability to do that stuff. So let me switch that back.
Can you script across requests?
Can you script across requests? So you want it to like pick up something from one request and then apply something on the next one? Or?
Yeah, or conditionally.
I don't know if this has, I don't know what this does for variables and stuff. I would guess that if you wanted to do that, you could like set a global variable on the first request and potentially use it on your next one. I haven't honestly tried, but I would think this has classes and stuff. I could probably put that in a property and do that. So what I really use this for, so never happens to you, I'm sure, but every vendor that we work with says, what? Here, put our JavaScript in the head at the very top first, because our thing's the most important thing in the world, right? And I tell them, if your stuff is slow, that's going to suck for me, and people are going to wait. And so I talk to them about async and defer and everything. I will come in here and write, I don't think I have this code in here now. I'll actually write script that makes every third-party request fail. So like here, I've got, if the host name, this is my website. If it's my site, I want you to show it. If it's not, I want you to do a delay. Just sleep for 25 seconds, because I can turn that on, and then I know, is there any third-party thing that I use on my site at all that's making me have a problem when they're slow or when they return a 500 error. So it's a good way for me to look at single points of failure on my website without having to do a lot. I literally just put my domains that are okay. Everybody else falls into this and they're slow. And then I go look at my site and they say, it's not going to be a problem if you put me first and I'm slow. And then you make a video for them and you send it to them. And you say, it is actually slow. So that's a quick way to tell if you have any impacts like that. And there's a couple different events. The other one in here is on-exec action, which what that lets me do, down here I can customize. So there's a whole bunch of different things I'll show you later. I extended Fiddler with one that it's called RH, just remove host. So I'm telling it to remove local host, and you see all the sessions that had local host went away. So scripting, I can write my own script to customize basically how Fiddler's gonna behave. So there's also a lot of Fiddler extensions. The 3 that I gave you here are ones that Eric has written, but he's extended Fiddler with these third-party things, and I just want to show you a couple of them. So you have to download these separately, but the first one is making JavaScript pretty. So I'm going to clear this. So I use minified files for performance again. And if I make a request and I come back to Fiddler, you'll see these are minified. When I turn on that make JavaScript pretty, it actually unminified it, if that's a word, okay? I actually use source maps, if you're familiar with source maps, because it got all the spacing right, but when it minifies, it also changes all the variable names. But if you want to do a quick unminify, you can turn on that extension, and because all the JavaScripts are coming back through Fiddler on the way to the client, it will make them be formatted better, if that makes sense. It's a little easier to troubleshoot when you're in tools. The other one I like is called show image bloat. So let me pull this up again. I'm going to hit Control F5. If you notice, there's some bricks on that image. It's telling me that 43% of that image size is actually metadata. So if you've ever, I'm sure you've taken pictures on your phone, lat long, shutter speed, all that stuff gets embedded with the image. Your customers don't care about that on your production website, right? They don't care what shutter speed you use for your photo. You want to strip that stuff out. I use a tool called JPEG Tran, but I can see by running this that I missed it. So Eric, if you follow him on Twitter, he'll poke at people occasionally. If he goes out to their site and they're like 80% metadata, he'll post on Twitter and say, hey, you might want to look at your site, because basically 42% of the download time for that image is a complete waste, because I didn't take the metadata out, okay? There was also a drug lord in South America who finally gave an interview, okay? And they set up the palm leaves or whatever behind him so that they didn't know where he was. The reporter took his picture and had lat long turned on. So yeah, that didn't work so well for him. So I assume you're not drug lords, but take out your metadata anyways. Okay, you can write your own. So you actually can write. So I've got some Pluralsight courses at the end where I actually wrote my own extensions. So if you want to extend and add new features in the Fiddler, you can do that with .NET. Next one I'll show you is Fiddler Cap. So this is what's meant for non-technical people that are going to troubleshoot for me. So before I said I don't want the senior VP to have to do tracing. I might have to give this to her and say, I need you to clear your cookies, clear your cache, turn on decryption, all stuff I don't want to try to do over the phone with a senior VP of marketing, right? So I'll just tell her, install Fiddler Cap, and then just do this stuff, say yay, start a capture, opens up a browser, does whatever they want to do, find out what's wrong, come back to here, and they can say stop, save that archive file. When they send it to me, I'll open it in Fiddler, and it'll be exactly like I traced it in Fiddler. It's just easier for non-technical people to manage using Fiddler Cap. Again, normally what I do is I just set their proxy settings, but if you have to do a couple more layers like clear cookies or clear cache, that might be a good way to get that to happen on their machine. Okay, so a bunch of miscellaneous things. We talked earlier about how you can save the response files. You can also do screenshots. So I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to hit Control F5.
Question.
Yeah.
The clearing of cookies and cache, is that triggering that for whichever browser it is they're using? They could be potentially be, you know, if you have someone who's using Chrome or Firefox or Edge or something like that, are you triggering them to actually flush their caches at that point?
I think the way that that one's coded is probably specific to the Microsoft ones, because he was still working at Microsoft on the classic version when he does the clear. So I don't think that's clearing Chrome's. I think it's clearing IE probably, or Edge.
Okay.
And it'll pop up so they'll know the one they're in. But yeah, it doesn't do all of them. It's only going to do the one that it's going to open, and I think it's all the specific Microsoft ones. So let me go back to Fiddler here quick. So I want to show the screenshot feature. I'm also sure this has never happened to you, but somebody will send you and say, the site didn't work. And you're like, what didn't work? I don't know, it just didn't look right. Also not that helpful. There's a little camera here, it's in Fiddler Cap, and it's also here. You can actually hit the screenshot. It'll do a little countdown. So I gotta give it like 5 seconds. There you go. And it'll embed that screenshot directly into the trace. So now when they send to me and say stuff didn't work, I get to see the trace, but I actually get to see what the screen actually looked like. So then I know what's wrong, which is very helpful. We talked about encrypting the session before, so when you save it, you can encrypt it. There is a text wizard. So I just started doing capture the flag competitions last year, and this is a very helpful tool for that. It does all sorts of things you need to do as a web developer, like what's the hash, what's a 256 hash, I want to HTML encode this or decode this or do a base 64, whatever. You can just paste it in there and do that stuff right here. So it's kind of handy to be able to do conversions right within Fiddler. That's just under that text wizard. You can write custom inspectors. So people were, when WCF first came out and it was binary, people wanted to use Fiddler to do traces, but they, it traced it, but they couldn't understand what the WCF stuff was. So somebody actually wrote an extension for WCF that made it look understandable. So you can write extensions if you have any of your own custom stuff you need to send. I'll mention Fiddler Core. He actually made Fiddler headless. He took out all the tracing and everything and put it into Fiddler Core. So if you have a .NET app that you want to enable to do all the stuff .NET does, you can actually pull the core out, and it's a headless version of Fiddler that'll do all the tracing and all the other stuff. So you can just add it to your own .NET site. So some people use it when they want to write automated test software and stuff against their servers. They'll pull Fiddler Core so they don't have to write all the plumbing stuff that Fiddler would give them. You can spoof user agents if you want to. You can use the quick exec. So I talked about this quick exec down here. I can do things like, I'll make a request again. So I can do things like I want to see greater than 50,000 bytes. So those are all the ones that are greater than. I can do like less than 1,500. So if you like command line stuff, just be aware there's a full command line with all of the stuff you want to do in Fiddler in that bottom quick exec area. So I can select all of the CSS, stuff like that. You can customize the columns, so you can just add different columns if you need to see something different. The last one I'll show you from that slide is the host remapping. So I'm going to go open up example. If you've ever been to example.com. Hey, I already got it set up. Oops, you saw it already done. Forget you saw that for a moment. If I were to go out here at example.com and hit Control F5, that's what it looks like. If I want to actually intercept and point it to a different site, I can do that using the host remapping feature. So if I go under hosts, what I'm saying here is if you see www.example.com, send it to localhost port 86 where my site runs. And if I do that and hit Control F5, it looks like it's example.com, but it's not. Okay, so it took me quite a few years where I read Eric's book and thought, well, that's an interesting feature. I don't know where I'd ever use that. And then I ran into, I wanted to test on my own machine, my development machine, but I had third-party scripts that cared that I ran on production. Like if it wasn't running on www, the stuff wouldn't run. But I wanted to be able to go in Visual Studio and debug. So I actually used the host mapping and said, I'm the production site, so all the JavaScript on the browser thinks I'm talking to production, so they run like they're in prod. but I was actually debugging in Visual Studio on my own machine because I routed it to my own site here, okay? So that's kind of cool if you need to do that. So that's Fiddler Classic, all the advanced stuff. I just want to mention Fiddler Everywhere. Again, the advantages of it, it's 3.0 right now. It's multi-platform, so it's Windows, Linux, Mac. It's a less busy UI. So I've been showing you Classic. There's a lot of stuff in Classic, but it's not always easy to find all the stuff that you want to find. So they've done some work with the UI. They've got collaboration, so it's easier for you to share archives with other people within your company and such. They're putting all of their new development effort into Fiddler Everywhere. So they put in HTTP2 support now, and they're not going to put that in Classic. They're basically going to, at this point, it sounds like leave Classic alone, keep adding into Fiddler Everywhere some of the stuff I've been showing you, and not do a lot. So that they didn't put HTTP2 in Classic, they didn't put WebSockets in Classic. They've kind of leaving that sit where it is. So again, the stuff that's missing is the extensions, Fiddler script, breakpoints, quick exec. So I'm going to close Fiddler here quick and open Fiddler Everywhere. And this is a subscription service. That's the other difference for this. That's how they're funding their software work. So if you go to Everywhere, you need to get a subscription. It's very similar. I've got some filters on here, so I'm going to take those off. But if I hit Control F5, and I come back over here, okay, that was a boring one because it's the example site, sorry. Hit Control F5. So you can see it looks a lot like what you saw before. You've got your sessions here. I can do inspectors. It has a composer, so if I right click and say Edit in Composer, I can make modifications like I was showing you in Composer. They've changed the name from autoresponder to rules. So I can also drag things over here, drop them, and I can write rules like I did with autoresponder. So I've got some custom rules here that I have set up. If I share, I can share sessions and replay them. So if you do a lot of mocking of APIs and stuff with Postman, you'll like those additions because you can save specific API requests and just come down here and fire them off and replay them. So if you do that in Postman, that's something cool here. Does the HTTPS decryption and everything else. So I won't spend a whole lot more time on that other than make you aware of that. Some quick resources. So I do have 2 Pluralsight courses on Fiddler. The newer one is basically I have a problem on my website and I want to know, is Fiddler the right tool or is Developer Tools the right tool? So I just walk through, your styles don't work. How would you troubleshoot that? So that's the newer one. The older one I have is all just specifically Fiddler Classic, and it goes through all the stuff we did today, plus how do you write extensions and how do you do some of the other more advanced stuff I didn't cover. Eric wrote a book on Fiddler, so it's an excellent book. I've probably read it 10 times, and every time I go through it, I'll find something else, like that host mapping I found one time, and I'm like, that's interesting. I don't know why I would want to do that, but I just kind of kept it in my mind. It was something that could work with that. And then when I needed to do the prod thing, it came in really handy. So that's my Twitter, my email, my blog. That's the link to the slides and the code. The code's really small. It's just that one page that you saw, but all the slides are in there. And if you need to reach out at any of those things, you can reach me. Are there any other questions that people had? Nada.
Does it work with WebSockets?
So Classic does not. They just added that to Fiddler Everywhere. So the question was, does it work with WebSockets? And it does in the Fiddler Everywhere version. They just added that. So.
We had to compare Fiddler to Charles Proxy. Would you see the pros and cons?
I haven't used Charles a lot, to be honest with you. I started with Fiddler Classic so long ago that I just never ran into anything that I needed it for. I knew other people at work that when I told them I use Everywhere, they had just gotten used to Charles. I've told them some of the features, but I don't know enough about it to give you a good, how does it stack up, if that makes sense. I guess I've never run into anything I couldn't get Classic to do, and I've used it so long that that's just what I use. But anything else?
The Chrome developer, I'm just thinking, I guess Fiddler is an extensive version of Chrome developer version.
So like, you mean the dev tools?
Yeah, developer.
Yeah, so that's where both of them have their place. And the dev tools have been getting better, like they added in the network panel and the performance panel. They've been adding some stuff that only Fiddler had before. You can block some requests in dev tools, but there's still a lot of things that you can't do in there. And so that top course kind of goes into, you have a problem and which one's the right one. Like if you're doing JavaScript debugging, you're going to do that in DevTools because you can step through. If you're doing CSS styling stuff, you're going to do that in DevTools. If you want to modify stuff as it goes back and forth, you're going to want to use Fiddler. If you want to make a request slow, you're going to want to use Fiddler. So they both have their places depending on what you want to do. There's some overlap for them, but most of the things I showed you today, you couldn't just do in DevTools alone. So yeah.
With those making the site slow and so forth, does it have capability to simulate flaky network and drop packets?
He actually has a, you may have to send to me because I can't remember where he has it. He's got a place that you can make it intermittently fail at a percentage. So you can say like, I want 5% of this stuff to be slow. He also has where you can do more latency stuff, like specifically the latency part of it's slower. So I don't know if that's kind of what you're going for.
Yeah, simulating bad networks.
Yeah, and you'll have to send me because I can't remember off the top of my head where it is, but he specifically has a thing where it's just like pick a random number and make this fail at 5% or 25% or whatever.
I didn't know this. I mean, this kind of adds to it, but I guess Chrome has a built-in developer tool right there in the browser where you can simulate a slow network.
Yeah, so that one, if we go into the DevTools stuff, you can make the whole network be slow, which has some uses. So I can come into here and do like, be a slow 3G, but that's every request. When I'm typically doing it, I want to take vendor A who's telling me that his site won't matter if it's slow. I want to make his site slow. You know what I mean? I want to target individual requests. That's what I can't do in here. If I want to make it overall slow, this will do that in DevTools. But I like the more, I don't know, surgical is the right word, but specific requests. I want to make you fail or you be a 500 or whatever. It's just a lot easier to do in the rules and autoresponder, if that makes sense. Anything else? Otherwise, I'll put up the last slide again. You can always send to me later. Okay.
What things are you hoping that will be added to it? What's lacking?
I would like everywhere to have more of these features. That's what I would ask for. I really wanted HTTP 2, which came to everywhere now. Some of these advanced things aren't in Fiddler everywhere yet. I just want them to transition those in, because with Classic, I haven't run into anything where I wasn't eventually able to do it. So I felt that was pretty complete for me anyways. It was more now I want everywhere to get to parity there. And it's moving ahead, getting like HTTP 2 and WebSockets. And
When they find problems with everywhere, do the fixes get backported?
not that I've seen. Not that I've seen. Yeah, they haven't done many releases on Classic. I think they're putting their team all to everywhere and trying to get people to move there. So, okay. All right. Yep. Oh, I did have one other thing. So Jacob, raise your hand. UNO student in computer science and looking for an internship. So if anybody has a company that would be interested in an intern, stop and talk to him or email me if you would. Okay?
Yeah, great. I appreciate it, Robert.
Yep.
You can talk to me if you want. Yeah, so I think we have some giveaways to do. Robert, you had some T-shirts. You want to do those first?
Sure.
Can I use your computer?
Sure. Depending what you're going to do with it. I'm a security guy, so I'm going to watch it.
I'm going to wreck your.
Sorry, he's got Fiddler on, so okay.
Yeah.
That's right. That's the other trick you can do. I didn't show you. You can leave Fiddler running, but say don't show it in the tray, so that you can catch everything and people won't know you're running
You can
it.
intercept and pick the winner.
Yes.
I would let you win if you can do that. Yeah. so, Paige, what do we have? What do you guys have in Clay?
We have two $50 gift cards to Amazon and one $100 gift card, Visa gift card.
Nice. All right, so we'll start with t-shirts.
Okay, I've got 2 mediums and a double XL. That's all they sent me, so.
Oh, Courtney, you want to push the button? So if you've come to the user group for any length of time, you remember Courtney being like 8 years old up here pushing the button. So she's grown up a little bit since then.
Just a little bit.
Slow down a little bit so Mario's in the picture.
There you go. Is that good?
Yeah.
All right, so
This is a fancy random number generator.
yeah, this is Brian Olson
you not
wrote this.
seen
If
it?
anybody's interested in building another version of this, we'd love to talk to you. Yeah, so first winner of a t-shirt is Matt. There he is. Nice, nice, buddy.
Medium.
All right, what size do we have left?
We got a medium and a double XL.
Okay, you got to pick the right kind of people here.
I got you.
Katie.
Oh, Katie's not here.
Oh, that's right, she left. Yeah.
Where'd she go? I can take it to her. She's probably here.
Shrikant. What size are you?
Medium or double XL?
I'm gonna.
Yeah, go with medium.
I'm gonna.
Medium?
Yeah. They're guys, programmers, they don't care.
That's still.
All right, last t-shirt. Mohammed.
Nope.
Nope. Okay, try again. Steven.
Nope.
Nope. Try again. Adam.
Hey, are these people who RSVP?
These are all people that have RSVP'd.
reserved, right?
Yeah, they did.
They're all in the.
They might be on YouTube.
They're
They're
frozen.
going in the chat going,
No, it's true.
Gotta be present to win. Sue is not here that I saw.
.ed.
Yeah, somehow the email started showing up in there. Jim.
I can't wear extra large.
you gonna keep going? It's a 2XL, I don't know. Mine's an XL.
Well, all right. We've gone through enough names. Let's oh, sorry, Jim. Let's do this. We'll restart. Just press F5. And then if you've already won a t-shirt, you're not eligible. Sorry.
Oh, wow.
Yep, I know. But at least we can put some names back in. Hey! No, that's all right. This is for the. I'm sorry. This is for the gift card.
Okay.
So Shrikant. Oh, you're doing a t-shirt. All right, man. You got the luck tonight.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm here.
Yeah. All right. You got a $50 gift card?
Yep. Or a t-shirt.
Yeah, you got
So that t-shirt's actually, I'm up to 3XL. Oh. You guys gotta start offering like salads or stuff.
Yeah, really. All right.
give you a note.
This is for another $50 gift card. Jonathan, Ayu. Oh, there he is. Didn't even see you back there. All right. And this is the last one, $150 Visa card, right? 100, sorry, 100. Katie wins again.
But doesn't win.
Yeah. Hey,
Hey, that's me.
Bodie. Yeah. Congratulations, buddy.
Award for doing this presentation.
Yeah, you drove all the way here. You should get something for your time. Awesome.
Little piece of the gas.
Yeah, awesome.
If I go quick.
All right. Yeah, so I think that's all for this month. We are going to go over to Finnegan's and have some drinks and stuff. So if you guys want to join us over there, you're welcome to. Brian and I will be over here cleaning up, but we'll be over there in 15, 20 minutes.
Feel
And,
free to take some more pizza too.
yeah, looks like I've got some pizza left over. So if anybody likes cheese pizza.
I have a few Fiddler sticker laptop things too, if you want one of
And
those.
if you want a 2XL
Yeah, and if you want a
t-shirt,
2XL, here it is.
you can have it. All right. Yeah, we'll do better next month. I promise I won't change the venue the day of the event, and we'll do better. So yes, thank you. All right, thanks, guys.
I'm wondering if we're going to come back to building trash. You know, they got the news recently.